In a moment that many believed would come far into the future, a quiet hush has settled over the city of Rome. The world received the solemn news: Pope Francis has passed away. For some, this was a moment of heartfelt sorrow, a time of mourning for a man who served with simplicity, humility, and compassion. But for others, the moment stirred an ancient memory, one tied to a mysterious legend that has long been whispered about behind the Vatican's historic walls. This wasn't just the end of a papacy. To many, it was the fulfillment of a prophecy, one not spoken aloud for years, yet always lingering in the background of church history. Nearly 900 years ago, a humble monk named Malachi, later known as Saint Malachi, walked the quiet roads of Rome. A man of deep faith and silent contemplation, his life was marked by devotion and prayer. But one day, according to accounts passed down over generations, something extraordinary happened. While in the holy city, he was suddenly struck by a powerful vision, not a passing thought or a mere dream, but a vivid experience that he could neither explain nor ignore. In what many later described as a supernatural trance, Malachi reportedly saw a line of future church leaders, each one distinct, each one marked by a sign. The vision, as he described it, revealed a series of successors to the papal office, stretching across centuries, one after another, until what appeared to be the very final days of the Church's earthly mission. The monk carefully documented what he had seen, not with names or dates, but with short Latin phrases, one for each of the future popes. These phrases weren't random. They were deeply symbolic, filled with meaning that would only become clear with time. Malachi's list contained 112 such phrases. Each one was paired with insights that, in hindsight, seemed to describe the identity, origin, or personal traits of each corresponding pope with remarkable precision. Over the centuries, historians and theologians alike have revisited these words, noting curious matches between Malachi's poetic descriptions and the lives of popes who later fulfilled them. Some references were as subtle as a coat of arms. Others aligned with personal backgrounds, theological focuses, or significant world events during their time as spiritual leaders. But the final entry, number 112, stood out from the rest. It was longer, more intense, and far more foreboding. Where earlier phrases had been brief, sometimes even cryptic, this final one took a different tone entirely. It described a period of great difficulty for the Church, with language that hinted at challenges, trials, and even the collapse of the familiar. According to the words attributed to Malachi, this last pope would be known as Peter the Roman, a shepherd who would guide the faithful during a time of serious turmoil. And at the conclusion of his leadership, it was said, dramatic changes would follow. Now, with the passing of Pope Francis, many are beginning to connect the pieces once more. They point to the number 112 and count backward to Celestine Roman II, just as the prophecy outlined. By that count, Francis is the final name. For those who take the legend seriously, the timeline is now complete. But how do we make sense of the details? According to the old text, the final pope would be named Peter and would come from Rome. Yet Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, seems at first glance not to fit either of those criteria. However, those who believe the prophecy has deeper meaning invite us to look beyond appearances. Though Francis was born in South America, his family roots tell a different story. His parents were both Italian immigrants, having left their home country to build a better life across the ocean. Their heritage, customs, language, and faith were all shaped by Rome. In this way, Francis carried within him a deep connection to the heart of the Church, not only through belief but through blood. His lineage, some argue, places him symbolically, if not literally, within the city of Rome. And then there's the matter of the name. While Peter was not the name he bore at birth, the choice he made upon becoming pope was filled with significance. When asked what name he would take as the new spiritual leader of over 1 billion faithful, he chose to honor Saint Francis of Assisi, a man known not for power or prestige, but for surrender, simplicity, and service. The original Saint Francis was a figure who embraced poverty, lived among the outcast, and dedicated his life to rebuilding the Church not with bricks, but with love. What many forget is that Saint Francis's given name was not Francis at all. He was born Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone, literally, John, son of Peter. In this subtle yet powerful way, Pope Francis's chosen name indirectly pointed back to the very symbol mentioned in Malachi's vision: Peter. A man born of Italian descent, symbolically Roman, choosing a name rooted in the legacy of the Son of Peter. To those who see the prophecy as a roadmap, not a riddle, the pieces fall into place with remarkable clarity. The number, the background, the symbolism all echo the elements described centuries ago. While skeptics may dismiss these connections as coincidence or poetic storytelling, others believe they represent a divine tapestry slowly unfolding, thread by thread, across time. What does this mean for the future? That remains to be seen. The prophecy is not a declaration of doom, but rather a call to pay attention, to seek truth, to reflect, and to remain anchored in hope, no matter how uncertain the path ahead may seem. And in the quiet stillness now settling across the Vatican, as bells toll in memory of a beloved leader, the world watches not with fear, but with faith, ready for whatever comes next. He was the one they counted as number 112, a man whose life and calling echoed a pattern described long ago. A figure shaped by quiet strength, humble origins, and a story marked not by triumph, but by trial. And just as that ancient prediction suggested, he led not during an age of celebration, but through a season of storm. Pope Francis didn't inherit a peaceful church. He stepped into a moment of reckoning. And from the very start, his life had been shaped by pain that would prepare him for everything to come. Long before he ever wore white robes or stood before crowds in St. Peter's Square, Jorge Mario Bergoglio faced a test that would shape his soul forever. As a young man, full of potential and dreams, he was suddenly struck by a mysterious illness. It began with sharp, sudden pain along his side, discomfort that escalated into a relentless fever. Soon, even the simple act of breathing became a struggle. The air that once filled his lungs now seemed distant, unreachable. His strength faded quickly. Alarmed, his family rushed him to the hospital, and it was there that life changed. The doctors moved quickly, their expression serious. After a thorough examination, the diagnosis arrived. A severe pulmonary infection had taken hold, forming cysts that had damaged one of his lungs. The infection was spreading fast, and the doctors had no choice but to act decisively. Part of his right lung would need to be removed. The operation would be painful. The recovery even more so. For days, he lay in silence, surrounded by sterile walls and the faint beeping of hospital machines. Outside, life carried on, but inside that quiet room, a transformation began. He was no longer the strong young man he had been weeks before. He was weak, fragile, vulnerable, and yet, something powerful was unfolding. For the first time in his life, he faced the reality that nothing, not even his next breath, was guaranteed. But he didn't react with fear. He responded with reflection. As others prayed for his healing, he prayed for understanding. He didn't ask for the pain to stop. He asked for the pain to mean something, to have purpose. That single experience, etched into his soul during those long nights, would never leave him. It shaped how he viewed the world. From that point on, every day felt like a gift. Every breath, a blessing. And if God had chosen to spare him, then it must be because there was something left for him to do, something greater than he could yet imagine. Months after his recovery, though his lungs remained damaged and his strength was still returning, he made a choice that would change everything. He dedicated his life to service. To God. To a path that would eventually lead him not to comfort or luxury, but to the greatest responsibility on earth: the care of over 1 billion souls. Years later, when he was elected Pope, the world watched with curiosity. This wasn't the kind of man most expected. For the first time in history, the new leader of the Church wasn't from Europe. He wasn't chosen from one of the traditional centers of power. And he wasn't part of the typical Vatican hierarchy. He was a Jesuit. A man of deep thought and simple living. A man whose greatest strength was that he looked, walked, and spoke like the people he served. From the moment he stepped out onto that balcony in 2013, he did things differently. He chose simplicity over ceremony. Instead of luxurious robes, he wore a plain white cassock. Instead of a golden throne, he sat in a simple chair. Instead of words full of formality, he greeted the world with humility. But that simplicity did not shield him from hardship. If anything, it prepared him for what was to come. The church he inherited was not at peace. It was reeling. Wounds that had been covered for too long were beginning to bleed in public view. Allegations and investigations of abuse had emerged from every continent. Victims, once silenced, now spoke with courage. Communities that had once trusted were now uncertain. And the credibility of the institution hung in the balance. Francis didn't look away. He didn't deny. He didn't shift the blame. He stood in front of the world and asked for forgiveness. He met with survivors. He listened to their pain. And with trembling honesty, he began to act. He pushed for reform, for transparency, for accountability. But the journey was slow. Beneath the visible surface of the church were systems long resistant to change. Structures built on power, secrecy, and silence did not bend easily. Every step forward was met with resistance not just from outside critics, but from within the very halls where decisions were made. Yet the challenges didn't stop there. As Francis spoke of renewal, of listening, of opening doors to those on the margins, internal tensions began to rise. Differences of opinion turned into divisions. Some within the hierarchy saw his efforts as too progressive. Others thought he didn't go far enough. Letters were written. Debates broke out. Some voices even accused him of abandoning tradition. Still, he said nothing in reply. He walked forward, quietly, steadily, holding on to his vision. One moment in particular caused headlines to erupt around the world. During a press conference aboard a plane returning from his first papal visit to Brazil, Francis was asked about individuals who identify as gay. His reply was simple, but powerful. If a person seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge? For many, this marked a moment of healing and welcome. For others, it sparked confusion and criticism. But Francis was not seeking applause. He was seeking compassion. And still, the opposition grew. Some theologians published open critiques. Some voices even used words like heresy, a heavy accusation within church circles. But Francis never responded in anger. He remained calm. He did not lead with argument. He led with conviction. At the heart of that conviction was one idea that would define his papacy: synodality. A concept often misunderstood, yet central to his dream for the future of the church. To Francis, this word meant walking together. Not just clergy, not just theologians, but everyone, laypeople, families, the poor, the unheard. It meant listening with patience, discerning with wisdom, and embracing the truth that the Holy Spirit can speak through anyone, not just those in robes. He imagined a church that would not lead from the top down, but journey side by side with its people. One that gave voice to women. One that welcomed those who had felt rejected: migrants, divorced persons, the overlooked. His vision wasn't about abandoning tradition. It was about fulfilling it in a new way through unity, through compassion, through presence. And through it all, every accusation, every trial, every moment of silence, and every gesture of mercy, Pope Francis remained steady. Because deep inside, he remembered that hospital bed. He remembered what it felt like to face the fragility of life. And he knew that no matter how loud the world became, he wasn't here to win approval. He was here to serve and to lead the church, not around the storm, but straight through it. He led not with strategies or slogans, but with a heart that had been shaped by humility. For Pope Francis, this was never about popularity, image, or approval. It was about a profound inner conversion, a commitment to guide the church with compassion, even when every step forward drew criticism from both sides. Some saw him as too lenient. Others feared he was too cautious. In the echo chamber of social media, every gesture, every word he spoke, was magnified beyond measure, applauded one moment, questioned the next. But beyond internal church debates, Francis faced a world that was rapidly shifting, a world in the grip of upheaval. His pontificate unfolded alongside some of the most turbulent years in recent history. Across continents, war continued to cast long shadows. Conflict, such as in Eastern Europe, left devastation and displacement in its wake. In other parts of the world, entire communities of Christians faced persecution, hardship, and fear simply for professing their faith. At the same time, the earth itself groaned under the weight of crisis. Climate change accelerated. Natural disasters grew more intense. Entire regions faced economic instability, inequality, and growing desperation. And as if all of this weren't enough, the year 2020 brought something the modern world hadn't seen in over a century, a global pandemic that shook humanity to its core. COVID-19 swept across the globe, silencing streets, closing churches, and confining billions to isolation. Places once filled with song and prayer fell quiet. Public life froze. Pilgrimages halted. Masses were cancelled. For the first time in living memory, the faithful were unable to gather. Hope flickered in many hearts, and fear crept into homes from every corner of the world. And then, an image emerged, one that would be etched into the memory of this century. A lone figure stepped out into the rain-soaked emptiness of St. Peter's Square. The cobblestones glistened under the pale light. The wind whispered through the colonnades. And there, beneath the vast sky, stood Pope Francis utterly alone. No crowds, no choir. Just silence, rain, and the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. Before him, the Blessed Sacrament was exposed. He raised his voice in prayer and blessing over a world on its knees. It was a moment unlike any other. And in that silence, where it seemed as if even heaven had gone quiet, he offered the words that would echo through history. We are not alone. In those 4 words, he reminded the world that even in its darkest night, even when fear eclipses faith, the light of God is not extinguished. It remains flickering, persistent, alive. That moment was not staged. It wasn't a photo opportunity. It was the purest expression of what Francis's leadership had always been: presence. Not the kind that hides behind power, but the kind that enters suffering, stands in solidarity, and refuses to abandon the people. And still, he kept moving forward. As the world slowly emerged from the grip of the pandemic, Pope Francis made one of his most daring decisions. He traveled to Iraq, a land scarred by war, where ancient Christian communities had endured unspeakable hardships. For decades, popes had hoped to visit, but none had done so. It was dangerous, complex, unpredictable. But Francis went anyway. In dusty cities and among broken buildings, he met with Christians who had remained resilient through terror and persecution. He visited sites once devastated by violence and extremism, where hope had nearly vanished. And yet, he didn't come with condemnation. He came with arms open, a heart ready to listen, and words that sought healing over revenge. But he didn't stop there. Francis also reached out to Muslim leaders not in symbolic gestures, but in authentic encounters. He sat down with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, one of the most respected voices in the Islamic world. The 2 men, once separated by centuries of theological distance, signed a groundbreaking document together, the Document on Human Fraternity. It wasn't just a treaty. It was a declaration that faiths could come together for peace, for justice, for human dignity, not in spite of their differences, but because of the values they held in common. And he extended that same spirit of dialogue to the Jewish community as well. He visited sacred memorials, stood before the haunting remains of Auschwitz, and embraced survivors of anti-Semitism with tears in his eyes. He listened to their stories not just of suffering, but of survival. In those quiet exchanges, he reaffirmed the Church's unwavering commitment to memory, justice, and shared humanity. His efforts didn't stop with Judaism and Islam. Francis also made bold moves toward restoring Christian unity. He embraced the leaders of the Orthodox Church, particularly the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, in joint prayers and shared declarations. And in one of the most historic meetings of his pontificate, he met with Patriarch Kirill of Moscow. Their encounter, held in Cuba, marked the first time a pope and a Russian Orthodox patriarch had embraced in over 1,000 years. It was a moment of reconciliation, one not built on solving centuries of difference overnight, but on daring to meet, to talk, and to hope. But for all these historic gestures, his time as pope was anything but peaceful. From the beginning, Francis defied expectations. He declined the red velvet cape worn by his predecessors. He chose a simple residence over the grand papal palace. He preferred speaking in the language of the people instead of ancient Latin. And his leadership, far from being rigid, was rooted in listening to the poor, the excluded, the forgotten. He wasn't trying to overturn tradition. He was trying to remember its purpose. His personal motto spoke volumes. Miserando atque ligendo, which translates to, "He looked at him with mercy and chose him." It's a reference to the moment Jesus called Matthew, a tax collector and unlikely disciple. That phrase captured everything Francis believed: that the church is not a sanctuary for the perfect, but a home for the sinner. That mercy is not weakness. It is the strongest force in the universe. He never dismissed the importance of sin or repentance. But he believed that change begins not in condemnation, but in embrace. That people return to God not through fear, but through love. That the church's mission isn't to close the doors tighter, but to open them wider, not to erase boundaries, but to remind people that beyond every wound lies the possibility of healing. To bring that healing to the world, he launched a bold initiative. He sent out missionaries of mercy, specially chosen priests who had been granted the authority to forgive sins usually reserved to the Holy See. It was a gesture of radical grace, a sign that the doors of mercy were not closing, but swinging open. Because in his heart, Pope Francis knew that the greatest miracles begin not with rules, but with relationships. And if the Church was to endure the storms of the 21st century, it would not be through tradition alone, but through tenderness, truth, and the unshakable mercy of Christ. He traveled to prisons where dignity had long been forgotten. He entered refugee camps where hope had been extinguished. He washed the feet of those who had never been seen: immigrants, women, children, and even people from other religious traditions. And in each humble act, in each quiet gesture, he carried a message that echoed louder than sermons. That mercy is not a weakness to be hidden, but the strongest expression of love the world has ever known. It was not a theatrical display, nor was it crafted for applause. It was authentic. Francis believed at his core that love without mercy is incomplete, and that to represent the heart of Christ on earth, the Church had to first return to the heart of compassion. Everything he did was grounded in that vision. He reminded the world that the gospel is not a set of rules carved in stone, but a living invitation to kindness, transformation, and healing. And perhaps it was this unwavering dedication to love, even when unpopular, that shaped how many came to view his life through a prophetic lens. For centuries, one ancient writing has quietly stirred questions and reflections within religious circles. That writing is the so-called Prophecy of the Popes, attributed to a 12th century monk named Malachi. It is said that while walking the timeless streets of Rome, Malachi experienced a powerful spiritual insight, a vision so vivid, so specific, that he documented it not in lengthy books or sermons, but in a series of concise Latin phrases. One for each pope that would reign from his time until the Church's final chapter. 112 lines. Each carrying a symbol, a reflection, or a mysterious phrase pointing toward a future pontiff. At first glance, these phrases seem poetic, abstract, even cryptic. Yet historians and scholars over the years have noticed a pattern. Many of the mottos appear to align with real-life events, origins, or emblems of past popes. And this brings us to something remarkable. Pope Francis Jorge Mario Bergoglio is identified by many interpreters of this list as the 112th figure. The final entry. A humble leader from Argentina with deep Italian roots, serving as a bridge between continents, traditions, and generations. Though he was born in Buenos Aires, Francis carried within him the lineage and culture of Italy, the spiritual and ancestral home of the Catholic Church. His parents, Italian immigrants, had fled the difficulties of a war-torn Europe seeking new opportunity in South America. In that way, he was not just geographically distant from Rome, he was also intimately connected to it through blood, tradition, and faith. He embodied a new chapter written with old ink. And while his birth name was Jorge Mario, his chosen name as Pope Francis was more than symbolic. It was a mirror of the man he sought to emulate, Saint Francis of Assisi. The same saint whose original name was Giovanni di Pietro, the son of Peter. A detail not lost on those who search for meaning in history's layers. This connection has led some to see Francis not only as a figure of transition, but of culmination, the spiritual culmination of a long story of leadership, service, and sacrifice. According to the ancient prophecy, the final pope would be one who carried the soul of Peter, the very foundation of the Church, and would guide the faithful during challenging times. And indeed, Pope Francis's tenure has been marked by countless trials. From personal health struggles to the unprecedented challenges of global crises, from facing scandals and division within the Church to responding to political and environmental unrest, his papacy was not defined by ease. It was defined by resilience. He inherited a fractured Church. He led during moments when trust had been eroded. Yet through it all, he chose to walk forward, not with force, but with gentleness. Not to conquer, but to accompany. And even now, in the reflections surrounding his passing, there remains a growing curiosity. Was this the final chapter in a much larger story? But perhaps this question is not about conclusions at all. Perhaps it's about continuation, about legacy, about the kind of leadership that leaves a trail not of answers, but of enduring questions. Questions that invite every generation to reawaken their faith, to consider their purpose, to reflect on how we each carry the responsibility of goodness in a world that so desperately needs it. Over the centuries, certain events seem to have aligned with those mysterious phrases penned in the 1100s. Pope John Paul I, for example, was often associated with the phrase of the half moon. He was elected under a half moon and passed away just 33 days later, once again under a similar lunar phase. A brief light, a short but powerful chapter. John Paul II, one of the most iconic figures in modern papal history, was said to be of the labor of the sun. Intriguingly, his life began and ended during solar eclipses. His ministry spanned the globe, radiating like the sun itself, crossing borders and uniting millions in faith and hope. Then came Benedict XVI, linked by some with the phrase, the glory of the olive. While interpretations vary, some saw in him a scholar of peace and contemplation, values long symbolized by the olive branch. His writings were filled with wisdom. His teachings encouraged a return to spiritual reflection. His resignation, though unexpected, was an act of humility that paved the way for something new. Each of these moments adds a layer to the mystery, a puzzle that is not meant to create fear, but to remind us of the sacredness of time and the preciousness of each leader's role in guiding souls toward the light. So when it comes to Pope Francis, whether one views him through the lens of prophecy or simply as a servant who gave everything to his calling, one thing becomes clear. His legacy is not just in what he taught, but in how he lived. And if the past truly prepares us for the future, then the reflections left behind by these popes are more than markers in history, they are signposts for the journey ahead. As the world looks toward what comes next, uncertainty may linger. The next chapter of church leadership is yet unwritten. But maybe the deeper truth isn't about who will sit on the chair of Peter. Next, it's about what kind of faith will live on in the hearts of those they serve. For generations, sacred texts have offered timeless reflections, guiding hearts through moments of uncertainty and calling believers to remain grounded in truth and trust. Throughout history, many have turned to Scripture not to predict the future, but to find clarity in the present, especially when the world seems unsteady. And today, as we reflect on the passing of Pope Francis, those ancient words feel more meaningful than ever. The letters of St. Paul speak of a time of great spiritual challenge, urging believers to remain steadfast in their commitment to truth and love. The words of Jesus, as recorded in the Gospels, remind us that trials are not meant to paralyze us with fear, but to awaken our hearts with purpose. He spoke of difficult days, wars, hunger, suffering, and unrest not as punishments, but as signs that call us back to what truly matters: compassion, faithfulness, and the pursuit of peace. When we look at the world today, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Global uncertainty, economic hardship, conflicts that displace families, and growing divisions across societies often make the future seem fragile. But in the middle of this noise, there remains a stillness that speaks louder than chaos. That stillness is faith, and faith is not the absence of difficulty, but the courage to rise within it. The passing of Pope Francis does not signal the end of faith. If anything, it marks a new beginning, a fresh invitation to rediscover what it means to believe. Because faith at its core is not tied to one person, one leader, or one place. Faith transcends generations. It survives change, and it grows strongest when tested. This is not a moment for fear. It is a moment for reflection. To take a step back from the distractions of daily life and consider the direction of our hearts. To ask ourselves, what do we truly value? What guides our choices? What kind of world do we want to help build, not with grand gestures, but with small acts of goodness, kindness, and honesty? Francis often spoke of the need to remain awake, not just physically, but spiritually. He encouraged people to move beyond comfort, beyond routine, and to live with intention. One of his most quoted reminders came from the Gospel itself. Stay awake, for you do not know the day or the hour. Not as a warning, but as an encouragement to be fully alive, to see life as a gift, and to use each moment wisely. And that is perhaps the deepest legacy of Francis. He didn't build towering monuments or seek to carve his name into marble. What he built was harder to see but far more enduring. He built a legacy of humility, of presence, of shared humanity. He reimagined leadership not as authority, but as service. He was the Pope who walked without guards, who greeted strangers with joy, who met the wounded not from behind a desk, but face to face. He was not interested in titles or applause. He wanted to listen, to really listen. To mothers carrying burdens in silence, to refugees longing for home, to prisoners seeking redemption, to youth searching for meaning in a noisy world. To him, each person mattered. Francis believed in bridges, not walls. In conversations, not commands. He believed that truth had to be spoken, but always with love. His leadership was marked by compassion, but never at the expense of conviction. He held firm to the core values of the Church, while inviting all people regardless of background to take part in the journey of faith. He brought the world closer to the forgotten truth that mercy is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. Mercy is what allows justice to be human. Mercy is what allows love to heal. And above all, mercy is what keeps faith alive, not in books, but in hearts. Francis reminded the world that God's presence is not locked within cathedrals. It's found in broken homes, crowded hospitals, quiet prayers whispered before dawn, and in every act of kindness that often goes unnoticed. His repeated call to encounter, to see each person, really see them, was not a new doctrine, but a return to the very essence of Christianity. Love made visible. He didn't seek a perfect church. He sought a present one. A church that doesn't hide behind tradition, but walks into the messiness of the world and chooses to bring light, even when the world seems dark. He invited every believer to rediscover their faith, not as a duty, but as a relationship, a daily walk with hope, trust, and wonder. Now, as we mark the conclusion of his earthly mission, we don't just say goodbye. We carry forward what he stood for: the courage to welcome, the grace to forgive, the wisdom to listen, the faith to move forward, even when the road is unclear. He may be gone from the public eye, but the light he carried still shines. In every person who chooses compassion over condemnation. In every leader who chooses service over status. In every heart that chooses love, even when it's hard. Pope Francis has fulfilled his mission, not perfectly, not without criticism, but with honesty, courage, and an unwavering heart. And now he returns to the God he served. The one who guided him through storms and sorrows. The one he trusted with every breath. May his soul find peace beyond all earthly pain. May the heavens welcome him with open arms. And may we honor his memory not just with words, but with the lives we lead from this moment forward. Rest well, Francis. Your journey may be complete, but your echo remains.